My son built a machine out of a cereal box, 4 rubber bands, 2 bottle caps, and a pencil. And it worked. You wound the pencil, and the rubber bands took the energy and held it. And when you let go, the bottle caps spun and walked the whole thing across the kitchen table like a little animal that had decided to be alive. He was 9 years old. He had figured out, on his own, with no help from anybody, how to store force in one place and release it in another. There are grown engineers who could not explain to you cleanly what my baby did with a cereal box on a Tuesday afternoon. He looked up at me with that gap in his front teeth and he said, "Mama, it's an energy machine." And his whole face was lit up like a porch at Christmas. 3 days later, his school sat me down in a small room with bad chairs and told me my son was a behavior problem. I want you to hold both of those things in your mind at the same time, the way I had to. The machine and the meeting. Because by the time I am finished telling you this story, you are going to understand exactly what those people saw when they looked at my brilliant little boy, and exactly what they were too lazy and too sure of themselves to see. And you are going to find out what happens when a school decides to underestimate a black mother without bothering to ask what that mother does for a living. My name is Charlene Mercer. I am 46 years old, and I live in Bowie, Maryland, with my husband Reggie and our son Elijah, the one with the energy machine. And here is the part the school did not know, the part that is the whole hinge of this story. For 22 years, I have been a school psychologist. Evaluating children is my profession, sitting in those exact meetings on the other side of that table, deciding which children get help and which children fall through, reading the difference between a child who will not and a child who cannot. That is not something I needed them to explain to me. That is my life's work. They were about to lecture a master mechanic about her own engine, and they had no idea. Before I go on, let me ask you something, because I know I am not by myself out here. If you have ever had to walk into a room full of so-called professionals and fight to be treated as the expert on your own child, tell me in the comments. Tell me what they said to you. I read every one of them, and I have a feeling some of you are going to recognize this room. Let me tell you who I am at that table when it is not my own child. I am the one they call when nothing else has worked. In my district, I am the person teachers come to when a child has been written off by everybody else. And they say, "Charlene, before we give up, will you look at him?" And I look. I have spent 22 years learning to see the child underneath the label. Because I learned a long time ago the single most important truth of my whole profession, and it is this. A behavior problem is almost always an unmet need wearing a disguise. A child who cannot sit still might be a child who cannot see the board. A child who will not read out loud might be a child whose letters swim on the page and who has decided he would rather be the bad kid than the dumb one, because bad is a choice and dumb feels like a sentence. The acting up is not the problem. The acting up is the smoke. My whole job is to walk into the smoke and find the fire and put my hands on what is actually burning. I have done it for hundreds of children. I have found the deaf child everyone thought was defiant. I have found the gifted child everyone thought was disturbed. I have sat with mothers who could barely afford the bus downtown, and I have made sure their babies got every single thing the law owed them. Because I know what the law owes them, down to the comma. There was a boy once, years ago, I will call him Marcus, who had been suspended 11 times before his 9th birthday and was one incident away from an alternative placement, which for a child that age is very nearly the first step on a road that ends somewhere with bars on it. Everybody had a thick folder on Marcus. Nobody had given him a hearing test. I gave him one. That child had a moderate hearing loss in both ears that no adult had ever thought to check, and he had spent years being punished for not following directions he could not hear. He had learned that if he was going to be in trouble either way, he might as well earn it on purpose, because at least on purpose was a thing he chose. We got him hearing aids, a seat at the front, and a teacher who understood. And the last I heard, that young man was on the honor roll. 11 suspensions, and the whole thing was a pair of ears nobody bothered to check. I carry 100 Marcuses in my memory, like a second heartbeat. So do not sit across a table and tell me a child is bad until you have ruled out everything that might be true instead. I take that work home in my chest every night. So you can imagine, you can maybe just imagine, what it did to me to become one of those mothers on the wrong side of my own table in my own son's school. Now let me tell you about Elijah. Eli has always been a builder. Before he could write his name, he was taking the backs off remote controls to see how they thought. He reads, and I mean really reads, anything you put in front of him about how a thing works. The Encyclopedia of Machines, the manual for the washing machine, a library book about bridges that he renewed so many times, the librarian finally just gave it to him. He asks the kind of questions that stop a room. Why does the moon follow the car? If you dug straight down, where would you come up? He is funny, and he is tender, and he will give you the last bite of his own ice cream if he thinks you want it. That is my child. You want to know what it is like to live with a mind like his? One night at supper he went quiet, and I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said, dead serious, fork up in the air, "Mama, if sound is just air shaking, how come you can't hear a flag move?" I did not have an answer. I am a grown, educated woman, and I sat at my own table, outthought by a 9-year-old over a plate of meatloaf. He keeps a flashlight under his pillow, not because he is afraid of the dark, but because he likes to take things apart under the covers after we think he is asleep. I have pulled 3 disassembled alarm clocks and the entire insides of a hairdryer out of that bed. That is not a problem child. That is a future spread out across a mattress, in pieces, waiting on somebody with the sense to help him put it back together, instead of writing him up for the mess. But there was one thing Ellie would not do, and it was read out loud in class, and it was do his worksheets. He would have a meltdown at the very sight of a page of words he was supposed to read by himself. And a child who melts down over a worksheet in a busy classroom with a teacher who has 26 other children and no time, that child gets a word written next to his name. And the word was not curious, the word was not gifted, the word they chose was disruptive. By that fall, it had a rhythm to it. My phone would ring in the middle of my own workday, in the middle of me evaluating somebody else's child, and it would be the front office, that bright, apologetic voice, asking if I could come get Elijah. He was having a hard day. A hard day. I would drive across 2 districts to find my son sitting on a bench outside the office, small and folded up in on himself, having missed another afternoon of learning so the building could have a quieter hallway. They had started keeping him in from recess, too, as a consequence. And I want every parent listening to know that they do this. They take away the running and the air from the exact child who needs it most. And then they act surprised when the bottled-up boy is even harder to manage by 2 o'clock. They were treating the symptom in a way that fed the sickness and calling it discipline. I knew the research on every piece of it cold. I just had never had my own son's name attached to it before. And that changes where a thing sits in your body. It stops being a study. It starts being your baby on a bench. I knew, the way you know your own face in a mirror, what was actually happening. My son, who could read 3 grades above his level when the subject was machines, who could not get through a simple worksheet, was telling me something. That is not a child who will not. That is a child who cannot, in one specific way, and who is drowning in shame about it. and who has figured out that it is better to get sent to the hallway for being bad than to be exposed at his desk for being, in his own mind, stupid. To anyone who knew how to look, it was written in the air around him in letters a foot tall: dyslexia. My brilliant boy almost certainly had dyslexia, and instead of testing him, his school was disciplining him for it. So I asked for a meeting, and that is where they made their mistake. The first thing the assistant principal did, a man named Dennis Pruitt, was come around the table to where I was sitting, crouch down next to me like I was a child myself, lower his voice and say, "Mom, I know this is a lot. We just want what's best for Elijah, same as you do." Mom, not Mrs. Mercer, Mom. And the voice, the slow, warm, careful voice you use on somebody you have already decided cannot quite keep up. I have used rooms to read people my entire career, and in 4 seconds, Dennis Pruitt told me everything about what he saw when he looked at me. He saw a tired black woman, probably doing this alone, who was going to get emotional, who needed to be managed gently until she signed whatever they put in front of her and went home. He had a folder. In the folder was a behavior plan, not an evaluation, not a single test of why my son could build a working machine but could not read a worksheet. A behavior plan with a chart and stickers and consequences, designed to make the smoke go away without anybody ever once looking for the fire. He slid it across the table and he started explaining it to me, slowly, the way you would explain it to somebody who had never seen a school before. I let him. I want you to hear me on that, because it is the part people find hardest to understand. I let him talk down to me. I did not stop him and announce my degrees. I did not slap my credentials on the table. Because I had been doing this work for 22 years, and I knew something Dennis Pruitt did not know, which is that the moment is not where you win. The record is where you win. So I sat there, and I let that man show me, all the way, exactly how little he intended to do for my child, while I quietly noted every law he was about to break. There were others in that room, and I read them too, because that is what I do. There was the school counselor, a pleasant woman who had clearly never once observed Elijah herself and kept referring to a single sheet of complaints. There was Eli's classroom teacher, who looked miserable, who I could tell did not entirely agree with what was happening, but was too new and too scared to say so. And there was one more person, a first-year teacher who was only there to take notes, a young woman named Bryn Kowalski, who I caught looking at me twice with something in her face that was not pity. It was closer to a warning, like she wanted to tell me something and could not. When Mr. Pruitt finished his presentation about the sticker chart, he folded his hands and he said the sentence that I will carry to my grave. He said, "Now, I know as a parent, it's easy to think your child is special. Every parent feels that way. But what Elijah needs isn't testing. It's boundaries and consistency at home and at school." Every parent feels that way. As if I were any old mother fooled by love, as if the energy machine were a refrigerator drawing, as if I did not assess the difference between a struggling child and a gifted one for a living. He was not cruel. I want to be fair, because the truth is more useful than a villain. Dennis Pruitt was overworked and underinformed, and he had simply never in his life had to imagine that the quiet woman he was calling Mom across that table knew his job better than he did. His bias did not come at me with a raised voice. It came at me crouched down low and gentle, calling me by a name that was not mine. I asked him, very politely, whether the district was going to evaluate Elijah for a learning disability. And the temperature in that room changed. The counselor started talking about how testing can be stigmatizing. Mr. Pruitt said they really like to try interventions first, and that an evaluation was a big step and not usually necessary at this stage. Every word out of their mouths was a small, soft door being closed in my face. And I understood then, with no doubt left in me, that they had no intention of finding out what was wrong with my son, because finding out would cost them time and money and effort, and it was so much cheaper to simply decide that the problem was him and the problem was me, and a sticker chart would do. I want to tell you I stood up right then and set them straight, but I promised you the truth, and the truth is that I went home that night and I almost let them win. I sat on the edge of Eli's bed after he was asleep, and I was so tired I could feel it in my teeth. And I started to bargain with myself the way exhausted mothers do. I told myself maybe I was too close to it. Maybe I was being one of those parents, the kind I have gently handled in 100 meetings, the kind who cannot see their own child clearly because they love him too much. Maybe, I thought, I should just take the behavior plan, keep my head down, work with him at home, and not become the difficult mother in a building where my son had to spend 7 hours a day. I knew exactly how schools talk about that mother once she leaves the room. I had heard it in my own break room. God forgive me. The rolled eyes, the "here we go again." I did not want them doing that to Eli because of me. I thought, maybe the kindest thing I can do for my son is to make myself small. Reggie found me sitting there in the dark. My husband is a quiet man, drives a route for the post office, says about 40 true words a day and means every single one of them. He sat down next to me, and he did not tell me to calm down, and he did not tell me to go to war. He just said, "You spend all day finding other people's kids. You telling me ours is the one you're going to miss?" And then, before I could even answer him, from the doorway, in his pajamas, Elijah, who was supposed to be asleep, said the thing that ended every argument I was having with myself. He said, "Mama, am I the dumb one? The kids said I'm in the dumb group." My brilliant boy, the one with the energy machine, asking me in the dark if he was the dumb one. I am going to hear that sentence for the rest of my life. And there was no more bargaining in me after that. There was just a mother with a job to do, and the one thing on this earth I have never once been bad at. And then I did something I should have done first. I opened the composition notebook Eli kept under his mattress, the one he thought I did not know about, where he draws his inventions, pages and pages of them. A machine to water plants while you sleep, a backpack with a fan in it for summer, a device drawn in careful 9-year-old lines that he had labeled, and I had to sit with this for a long while. A reading helper for kids whose words move around, he had invented, in his own private notebook, a tool to help children like himself, before anyone had ever given his struggle a name. My son knew his words moved around. He had no idea that there was a word for it, or that it was common, or that it had nothing to do with being smart. He just thought he was broken. And being the gentle soul that he is, he had started designing a machine to fix not just himself, but every other kid he imagined was as alone as he was. I closed that notebook, and I was done bargaining. There was not one cell left in my body willing to make myself small. Because here is what I finally understood sitting on that bed. If I, with my degrees and my 22 years and my comma-deep knowledge of the law, if I could be talked down to and managed and sent home with a sticker chart, then what in the world was happening to all the mothers who did not do this for a living? The ones they assumed correctly would not know their rights. I was not just fighting for Elijah anymore. I was fighting as the one mother in that building who knew precisely where every body was buried, and I was not going to waste that. So I went to work, my kind of work, quiet and complete and by the book. I put my request for a full evaluation in writing, dated, specific, citing the exact federal law that requires a school to evaluate a child when there is reason to suspect a disability, which there obviously was, because they were disciplining him for it. Putting it in writing matters because the day a parent makes that request in writing, a legal clock starts ticking that a sticker chart cannot stop. They did not know that I knew about the clock. People think the law is a wall. It is not. It is a clock. The protections are real, but they only wake up when somebody who knows about them sets them in motion. And schools are very good at letting the year run out on parents who do not. A child can lose a whole grade waiting on a meeting that keeps getting rescheduled, and by the time the family figures out the rules were on their side the entire time, the boy has already decided he is stupid, and the year is already gone. I had watched that clock run out on too many other people's children to ever let it touch my own. Then, because I suspected they would drag their feet, and because I could, I did something many parents cannot, and I do not take it for granted. I paid, out of our own pocket, for a private, independent evaluation of my son by one of the most respected educational psychologists in the state, a woman whose name, in our field, makes people sit up straight. I did not announce it. I just had it done. And while I waited for that report, I kept showing up to their little meetings, and I kept letting Dennis Pruitt call me Mom. And I kept my face soft and my mouth mostly shut, and I let them believe they were managing me. Because I have learned that there is a particular power in being underestimated, if you have the patience to let it ripen. They were building their whole case on the idea that I did not understand the system. I was about to show them that I had helped build it. The day of the eligibility meeting, I sat in my car in the school parking lot for a minute before I went in. I am a praying woman, not a loud one, just steady. And I said a short prayer that was mostly 2 words: steady me. Then I picked up my folder, and I picked up Eli's energy machine, the actual cereal box machine, which I had brought with me and set on the seat like a passenger. And I walked in. The room was fuller this time. Mr. Pruitt, the counselor, the teacher, young Bryn Kowalski in the corner again, and a district representative in a suit. Mr. Pruitt opened by thanking everyone for their patience and saying he hoped we could all agree that Elijah had made some progress on his behavior plan and that formal testing still seemed premature. And then I asked if I could share something first. And I set my son's machine down in the middle of that table, and I wound the pencil, and I let it go. And that little cereal box walked across the conference table on 2 bottle caps and stopped right in front of the man who had called my child a behavior problem. And while they were all looking at it, I finally introduced myself. Properly. I told them my name was Charlene Mercer, and that for 22 years I had been a nationally certified school psychologist, and that I conducted the very evaluations they were telling me my son did not need. I watched it land on Dennis Pruitt's face 1 inch at a time. You have to understand, I had sat in his exact chair hundreds of times. I knew the small physical tells of a person realizing, in real time, that the floor they have been standing on so confidently is not under them. The way the pen stops moving, the way the eyes go looking for the district representative to measure how much trouble this is, the way the friendly voice, the one that had called me Mom, suddenly could not locate itself. I was not raising my voice because I was no longer talking to the man who had crouched down beside my chair. I was talking, very precisely, to the record and to the representative in the suit who knew exactly what a documented violation costs a district, and who was now looking at me the way you look at the one person in the room who actually knows what they are doing. Then I opened my folder, and I walked them, calmly and without raising my voice 1 degree, through the law, through their legal obligation to evaluate a child they had reason to suspect had a disability, through the written request I had made, and the timeline that request had started, and exactly how many days of that timeline they had let quietly expire, and then I laid down the independent evaluation, 16 pages, signed by a name that made the district representative in the suit go very still. I told them what it said, because I had read it the way I have read 1,000 of them. My son's overall cognitive ability was in the very superior range. He was, in the language of our profession, gifted. And he had a significant, classic, textbook reading disability, dyslexia, that not one person in that building had bothered to look for because they had been too busy writing his name on a discipline log. He was not a behavior problem. He was a brilliant, struggling, ashamed little boy who had been failed by the exact people sitting at that table. And the proof was in 16 pages that no sticker chart in the world could argue with. I did not gloat. I want you to know that. There was no part of me that enjoyed it, because every law they had broken for my son, they were breaking for other children too. Children whose mothers could not pay for 16 pages and did not know about the clock. So I did not dance on that table. I just told the truth, completely, in language none of them could pretend not to understand. And I let it sit there in the room like the weight it was. Now, here is where I have to be honest with you, because the movie version is not how it went. Dennis Pruitt did not break down and beg my forgiveness. Men like that rarely do. What he said, after a long silence, was, "Well, clearly we have some things to look into." That was all. No apology. He gathered his folder, the same way I had once gathered mine, and the system moved, because once the law is on the table in plain sight, the system has to move. Elijah was found eligible that afternoon. He got his evaluation made official. He got reading intervention from a specialist trained in exactly his kind of mind, and at my insistence, with the independent report backing me, he got referred for gifted services too, because a child can be both, and mine is. The hardest and the best conversation of that whole year was the one I had with Eli on our front steps, when I finally told him the name of the thing that made his words move around. I was scared to tell him. I worried a label might land on him like a verdict. Instead, his shoulders came down from around his ears, and he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "So it's not because I'm dumb. It's just how my brain works." And I told him that was exactly right, that his brain was a beautiful machine that reads a little differently, and that all we ever had to do was teach it the way in. He thought about that, my little engineer, and he nodded slow, the way you nod when a piece that has been jammed for a long time finally seats itself. A diagnosis is not a cage. For the right child, told the right way, it is the first day somebody finally hands him the map. The deepest part of the victory did not come that day. It came slowly, the way the realest things do. It came about 7 months later, when Eli read me a chapter book out loud, stumbling, working hard, but reading. His finger under the words, his voice getting surer by the page, and when he finished, he looked up like he had just walked on the moon. It came at the district science fair the next spring, where a much fancier version of his energy machine, the one with the cereal box, took first place in his grade, and a man from a local college gave him a card and told him to call in about 9 years. It came the night I found that private notebook again and saw that he had crossed out the words, "A reading helper for kids whose words move around," and written underneath, in handwriting that was finally getting neater, "For kids like me." Like me. He had a name for it now. He knew he was not broken. He knew there were others. That is the whole ballgame right there. And there was one more thing, smaller than the science fair and somehow bigger than all of it. About a year on, Eli came home and told me there was a new boy in his class, getting in trouble for not reading, getting sent out to the hall, the whole tired song I knew by heart. And my son, 9 going on 90, walked up to that boy at recess and told him, matter of fact as you please, that maybe his words moved around the way his own used to, and that it did not mean he was dumb, and that there were people whose actual job it was to help, and that his mama could probably tell the boy's mama how to ask for it. He had taken the worst thing that ever happened to him and turned it, all on his own, into a hand reaching back. You cannot teach a child to do that. You can only fail to crush it out of him. And by the grace of God and a whole lot of stubbornness, we did not let them crush it out of mine. That young teacher, Bryn Kowalski, the one who kept looking at me like she wanted to warn me, she found me in the parking lot after the eligibility meeting, and she told me, quietly, that she had known something was wrong, that she had seen Eli reread the same line 10 times and panic, and that she had not known how to make anyone listen to a first-year teacher. I told her she was going to be one of the good ones, the kind who walks into the smoke and finds the fire. And I meant it. She did not look like me, and it did not matter even a little, because some things are not about sides. Some things are just about whether you are willing to see a child. So let me leave you with this. Every parent out there listening tonight, and especially the ones who have been called mom in that flat, managing voice by somebody who decided what you were before you opened your mouth, you are the expert on your child. You, not the folder, not the chart, not the man crouched down next to your chair using his patient voice. They are going to tell you that you are overreacting, that every parent thinks their child is special, that you should calm down and trust the process. And they are going to tell you this most insistently in the exact moments when you are most right. Do not let them shame you out of what you know in your gut. Ask your questions in writing. Learn what you are owed. And if the day comes when they slide a sticker chart across the table at a child who built a working machine out of a cereal box, you wind that machine up and you let it walk right across their table, and you make them watch what they almost threw away. I am Charlene Mercer. I find the children that everyone else gave up on, and the hardest, proudest work I ever did was finding my own in a room full of people who were paid to find him first and refused. They thought I was just his mother. I was the one person in that building who knew exactly what my son was worth and exactly what they were required to do about it. If you have ever had to fight a whole system to get one child seen, get down in the comments and tell me about your child, and tell me about the teacher who finally saw them. Because somebody out there scrolling tonight needs to know they are not the only one in that room. And if this story moved something in you, you already know how to find the next one. Go hug your babies, and do not you ever let anybody make you small in a room you were born to stand up in.